Private First Class Jordan Hayes had never been particularly aware of how strange humans seemed to other species, but as he walked through the sprawling halls of HFY Intergalactic University, it hit him hard. The walls hummed with the gentle thrum of alien technology, and the air smelled like a mixture of ozone and something floral. Above him, holographic displays floated, changing shape with each passing student. As a human among nearly 36 species from across the galaxy, he couldn't help but feel a little out of place. His earthling features an odd contrast to the others. Jordan had been briefed on the cultural importance of the exchange program. Humans were an unknown to many alien races, and his acceptance into the university, its first human student, was a monumental event. His people were known for their unpredictability and resourcefulness, but they weren't exactly renowned for their grace or elegance. Now, standing in the middle of a vast atrium, he felt like the center of attention, though it wasn't in the way he liked. Around him, a few students with tentacles wrapped tightly around their bodies shot curious glances. A group of translucent-skinned beings, their eyes glowing softly in a bluish hue, whispered to one another as they observed Jordan's every movement. The cold, silent stares made him shift uncomfortably on his feet. But it wasn't until he shifted his weight, allowing his knees to crack, that the first ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd. The sound wasn't subtle. A loud pop rang through the air, followed by a series of sharp, rhythmic clicks that echoed against the sterile walls. One of the tentacled beings, its long, flexible appendages coiling tightly, visibly recoiled in disgust. Another, a tall, slender figure with cerulean skin, gasped and instinctively clutched their arms to their sides. The sound of Jordan's joints cracking, something so ordinary to him, seemed to send waves of unease through the alien students. Jordan blinked, realizing the attention he was drawing, but he wasn't sure how to make it stop. He cleared his throat and tried to brush it off. "Sorry," he mumbled awkwardly, but his voice came out in an almost apologetic way. "It's just my knees. They get like that sometimes." The others stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. One of the four-armed, exoskeletal beings whispered something in their language, and then, with a slight tremor, they spoke to Jordan. "You are all right?" they asked, their voice low, almost hesitant. They didn't seem to understand how anyone could function with such a peculiar body. Jordan smiled sheepishly, shrugging. "I'm fine. I've had this for years. You get used to it." His response was met with silence, followed by a slight shift in the atmosphere. A few of the students seemed to relax, though most kept their distance, eyeing Jordan's every movement. The truth was, they hadn't expected this. In a university filled with species who were adaptable to harsh conditions, survival specialists, diplomats, and engineers who could withstand environmental stressors that would break most of their kind, the idea of a species whose bodies literally snapped, creaked, and popped under minimal stress was a terrifying thought. Still, Jordan made his way through the hall. Every step he took was punctuated by another small crack from his joints. Yet to him, it felt as natural as breathing. The noise had always been a part of him. What did it matter? But the aliens around him, they were starting to wonder, what was it like to be human? By the second day of Jordan's stay at HFY Intergalactic University, curiosity about his strange biology had reached new heights. During the alien anatomy class, a group of biology students had requested permission to examine his body. They were fascinated by the way his bones seemed to flex and crack under the simplest of movements, a peculiar trait that made them wonder about the hidden mysteries of human physiology. The request was approved, though Jordan wasn't sure if he was more excited about learning or being the subject of study. As he entered the lab, a blazing spectrum of colors greeted him. Aliens with iridescent scales, creatures with soft, gel-like bodies, and one with an exoskeleton that shimmered with reflected light. At first, Jordan felt a little out of place, but the excitement in the air was contagious. They weren't there to judge him. They were there to learn. Dr. Milo Kren, the lead professor for the class, was a middle-aged creche, a species known for its advanced biological research. Standing at nearly 7 feet tall, Dr. Kren's long, spindly limbs were adorned with soft bioluminescent stripes that flickered like distant stars. His large, compound eyes, however, never left Jordan as he approached the examination table. "Please, Private Hayes," Dr. Kren began, his voice a deep, resonating hum. "We would like to observe your joints, particularly your knees, and study the cause of these audible phenomena." Jordan chuckled softly, already becoming familiar with the unusual phrasing. "Sure thing, Doc. You're not gonna ask me to take my pants off, right?" He tried to keep it lighthearted, but Dr. Kren didn't seem to understand the joke. He gestured for Jordan to sit down on a transparent bench, where a small, hovering device would scan him. With a soft sigh, Jordan adjusted himself, and as soon as he bent his knees, there was the unmistakable crack. The sound filled the lab, making many of the students flinch. Several students, including a Turalian, a species with armored skin, looked at one another uneasily. They had never seen bones behave this way. "Fascinating," Dr. Kren muttered, leaning closer. "Human bones, they don't reinforce themselves in the way we've seen with other species. They seem to be incredibly flexible, almost as if they've adapted to discomfort." Jordan's expression was one of mild amusement. "We're tough. Pain's just part of life. Every joint in my body's kind of like that, but I can still get around just fine." At Gortek, a small alien with soft, translucent skin that shifted in color with emotion, tilted its head and raised a tentacle. "Isn't that painful?" it inquired, its voice laced with concern. "How can you continue after such a sound?" Jordan, still on the table with his legs crossed, shrugged. "I guess we got a pretty high pain tolerance. You just get used to it, like any athlete would." He watched as a Lunarian, a being made of gas and light, took notes on a small floating pad. "I've read that humans have a higher pain threshold than most species, but do you ever feel the need to rest your body?" "Well, sure," Jordan said, "but rest doesn't make the creaks go away. It's just something you live with." He could see the fascination in their eyes. To him, it was no big deal. But for these species who had adapted to environments where survival meant the ability to avoid any kind of discomfort, the human body was a curious, almost unnerving thing. Dr. Kren made a few more notes, fascinated by the data he was gathering. "This adaptation, it is not just biological. It is psychological too. You seem to have trained your minds to accept discomfort as normal, to thrive in it." Jordan grinned. "You could say that. If we had to give up every time something hurt, we'd never get anywhere. But I guess it's different for each species." He looked at them with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "For us humans, pain's just part of the deal. Get used to it, or don't. Your choice." The aliens, despite their advanced biology and technological superiority, found themselves with more questions than answers. How had humans evolved to endure so much? And perhaps even more curiously, why did they not fear it? The more they learned about Jordan, the more they realized humans were unlike anything they had encountered before. As Jordan left the lab, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The other students couldn't stop whispering, and Jordan's joints popped again as he walked. One more reminder of the mystery that was humanity. Word about Jordan Hayes and his strange resilience had begun to spread through Xanthar Intergalactic University like wildfire. What began as fascination soon turned into awe, then apprehension, and eventually, a feeling that perhaps humans weren't just resilient. They were built for something far more extraordinary than anyone had anticipated. Jordan hadn't expected to become a subject of fascination, but every day it seemed there was something new about his body that intrigued the alien students. Whether it was his incredible endurance or his ability to adapt to the harshest conditions, there was no escaping the fact that humanity seemed uniquely designed for survival. On the third day of classes, Professor Lyragen, the head of the university's psychology department, invited Jordan to participate in a human endurance study. The topic was simple: Could humans adapt to extreme physical and emotional stress better than other species? The aliens had conducted similar experiments before, but Jordan was about to be the first to offer himself as a subject. The class, packed with students from different planets, gathered in an open arena, a space designed to simulate various stressful environments. The objective was straightforward. Jordan would be put through a series of mentally and physically demanding challenges, while a team of researchers measured his responses. The first test was designed to test physical endurance. Jordan would run on a treadmill set to an extreme incline, simulating the type of high-altitude conditions found on many alien planets. The alien students watched as Jordan began to jog, the treadmill rapidly increasing in speed and incline, the machine working to push him to his limits. As the sweat beaded on his forehead, his joints clicked and popped with every stride. The sounds, the unmistakable cracking of his knees and shoulders, filled the room like a drumbeat. Some students shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward, mesmerized. To their surprise, Jordan kept running, his face a mask of determination. The more his body creaked, the faster he went. After several minutes, the machine reached its maximum speed, but Jordan didn't slow down. "It's like he's incapable of stopping," murmured a Gore-Tex student, whose species was capable of surviving in extreme conditions, but even they would be gasping for breath after a few minutes at the pace Jordan was maintaining. By the time the test ended, Jordan had pushed his body far beyond what most of the alien students could endure. His legs were shaking, his breathing labored, but there was a triumphant grin on his face. "I'm good," he said, his voice surprisingly calm despite the strain. "I could have kept going. Trust me." The room fell silent. Professor Liragen's eyes widened. "This is unprecedented," she said softly, almost to herself. "Most species would have passed out after the first minute. Yet he continues." The next test was mental endurance, stressful cognitive exercises designed to overload Jordan's senses and problem-solving abilities. He was given a set of alien languages, puzzles, and abstract scenarios. As he worked through them, his body still visibly sore, it was clear he was being pushed to his limit. Yet his focus never wavered. The alien students watched, astounded, as Jordan's hands moved fluidly from puzzle to puzzle, solving them with ease. His body might have cracked, but his mind was sharp as ever. Finally, the last challenge, a test of pure endurance against fear. The room was filled with alien creatures from Jordan's worst nightmares. Enormous, floating jellyfish-like beings, towering insectoids, and glowing, semi-ethereal creatures. The alien students had been warned about Jordan's strong sense of fear, which they thought would break his focus. Instead, Jordan stood still, his knees cracking as he gazed at the monstrous beings, his expression unfazed. "I've seen worse," he said with a shrug. By the end of the experiment, the data was clear. Humans were not only capable of enduring what seemed like insurmountable challenges, but their ability to adapt and push forward without hesitation made them unique among the galaxy's species. The aliens were left to wonder, what would it be like to be human? To live in a world where pain, discomfort, and fear weren't just obstacles, but things to be conquered. As Jordan left the arena, his joints still popping and cracking, the alien students looked at one another, their minds racing with questions and new admiration. One thing was for certain: human resilience was something they'd never forget. The following week, Jordan was invited to participate in an advanced environmental simulation by Professor Alexa, one of the most respected faculty members at HFY Intergalactic University. The purpose of the exercise was to test how different species adapted to extreme conditions, a field in which Professor Alexa was an expert. Most students from the university's various species had already been through such tests, which involved tolerating extreme heat, cold, and even physical stress. But Jordan was the only human in the class, and he had already become somewhat of an enigma. His legendary endurance was well known, and this lecture promised to test him in ways that were supposed to leave even the strongest aliens struggling. The classroom itself was a vast, dome-like structure where various environments could be simulated in real time. The first test was to expose the students to extreme heat, akin to the sweltering desert planets many alien species had evolved on. The alien students, most of whom had tough, weather-resistant exoskeletons or internal cooling systems, looked on as the temperature in the dome began to rise. First, it was a slow, steady increase. Then, the heat became unbearable. Even the Kresh and Lunarians, both species accustomed to high temperatures, began to sweat and fidget. Meanwhile, Jordan stood stoically in the center of the room, his knees creaking as he shifted his weight. The temperature kept climbing, reaching levels that would have made any human on Earth pass out within minutes. Jordan's face flushed, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Still, he didn't move. He'd been through hotter conditions before. This was nothing compared to the blistering summers back home on Earth. "I'm fine," Jordan said, his voice cutting through the growing tension in the room. He wiped the sweat from his brow, but his expression remained calm. The alien students were stunned. "How are you?" began one of the Kintar, their voice faltering. "This is unbearable." Jordan smiled. "It's just heat. You get used to it." Professor Alexa looked on, equally amazed. "You truly do have an astounding tolerance, Private Hayes," she said, nodding to herself. "But we're not finished yet." With a series of clicks from the control panel, the temperature shifted abruptly. The dome was now set to sub-zero conditions, simulating the freezing cold of distant ice worlds where even the most hardy species struggle to survive. The cold cut through the air like a blade, instantly sending chills down the spines of every student. Their breath came out in visible puffs, their bodies instinctively drawing closer to any warmth they could find. Jordan's knees, which had already been creaking from the previous heat, made an audible pop as he shifted on his feet. His breath, too, came in visible clouds, but he stood his ground. "Now this," he said with a small grin, "I'm more familiar with." The alien students watched in dumbfounded awe as Jordan's body began to shudder from the cold, but he refused to retreat. His joints popped and cracked again, but he didn't flinch. As the temperature continued to plummet, Jordan stayed standing, his teeth beginning to chatter. However, his willpower remained unbroken. One of the students, Avril, who had begun to withdraw from the cold, muttered to his fellow classmates, "How is he doing this? The cold is unbearable even for us." Professor Alexa stepped forward. "The human body," she said slowly, "is not designed to withstand the extremes of either heat or cold for long periods of time. Yet, Private Hayes, he endures. It seems his body, while fragile in comparison to ours, is resilient in ways we cannot yet comprehend." The room fell silent, each alien student looking at Jordan with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. The humans' bodies, fragile as they seemed, had a unique resilience that was something none of them had considered. Jordan, still standing, wiped his frozen brow and let out a soft laugh. "Guess I'm just used to roughing it." At that moment, there was a sudden pop from his knee that echoed across the cold room. It was the loudest it had ever been. Every student jumped in response, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Jordan just smiled again, despite the cold gnawing at his bones. "Don't worry, it's just my knees." The silence in the room was deafening. The alien students, still processing what they had just witnessed, were left to wonder, just how much could a human endure before breaking? And more importantly, would they ever be able to match that level of resilience? As the days passed, Jordan's reputation continued to grow at Sci-Fi Intergalactic University. What started as curiosity about his physical resilience had evolved into something more profound. The belief that humans, with their unique ability to endure hardship and push through limits, might hold the key to something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. On the 5th day of his time at the university, Professor Alexa asked Jordan to speak at a lecture for the incoming class of first-year students, a diverse group of species from all over the galaxy. She had been watching him closely, and had noticed something that was becoming clearer every day. The human spirit. Despite his body's apparent fragility, his cracked joints, his constant struggle to adapt to alien environments, there was a determination in Jordan that was unmatched. It wasn't just his body's endurance that intrigued the alien students, but his mental strength, his ability to keep pushing forward despite the pain and discomfort. Jordan stood at the front of a crowded auditorium, facing a sea of students who had come from planets where their species could endure extreme environments without even breaking a sweat. Some had regenerative abilities, others had evolved adaptive physiology, and some could even manipulate the environment around them to suit their needs. These were species that could survive in hostile climates, endure unimaginable physical trauma, and bounce back within moments. And yet, here they were, looking to a human, whose body creaked and popped at every movement, as a source of wisdom. "Good morning, everyone," Jordan said, his voice calm, though he could feel the weight of the room's expectation pressing down on him. "I know you're probably wondering how a species that cracks and creaks with every step can stand here as a symbol of resilience. I'll be honest, I don't have any secret formula for surviving the impossible. But I've learned something over the years. It's about not giving up." He could see the confused looks on some of their faces. How could a human, with all its supposed limitations, stand here and speak as though he had mastered the very art of survival? Jordan took a deep breath and continued. "On Earth, we don't have the kind of adaptations that most of you do. We don't have natural armor or self-healing abilities. Our bodies are fragile, and we're prone to injury. But what we do have is a stubborn spirit. The ability to keep moving even when things are tough, even when it hurts." He paused, letting the words sink in. Some of the alien students were listening intently, while others still looked skeptical. But Jordan wasn't here to impress them. He was here to teach them something more important. "We push through not because we don't feel pain," he explained, "but because we embrace it. We use it to fuel us. Every time we face a challenge, we don't run away from it. We keep going. We fight through the discomfort, through the fatigue, because that's what makes us stronger." A Lunarian student raised a translucent hand, her glowing eyes narrowed in thought. "But don't you eventually break? Your body seems to be in constant pain." Jordan shrugged. "Yeah, sometimes it feels like that. But we keep going anyway, because the alternative is worse. We don't just survive. We push for something better. And yeah, it's hard. But that's why we're here." His words hung in the air for a long moment. The room was quieter now, the students reflecting on what he had said. Jordan had never been one for speeches, but something about the way his body reacted to the alien conditions, the way he endured when others might have given up, seemed to strike a chord with them. The room was full of students from species that were practically indestructible, yet here was a human who had managed to teach them something they hadn't considered. Professor Alexa, who had been standing quietly in the back of the room, approached Jordan as the lecture concluded. "You've done something remarkable here, Private Hayes. You've shown them that resilience isn't just about physical strength. It's about the mindset, the will to endure, to push through when everything tells you to stop." Jordan smiled, his knees popping again as he shifted his weight. "I guess I've learned that you can't always rely on what you've got. Sometimes it's about finding out what you're willing to put up with. And when things get tough, that's what makes you keep going." As the students filed out, many of them nodded thoughtfully, deep in contemplation. Jordan had, in that one lecture, managed to shift their perspective on what it meant to truly endure. Maybe they weren't as indestructible as they thought. And maybe, just maybe, there was something they could learn from the human species after all. After Jordan's lecture on resilience, there was an unexpected shift in the atmosphere at Sci-Fi Intergalactic University. No longer was he seen merely as a specimen of curiosity or a biological oddity. The alien students, many of whom had once viewed humanity with skepticism or even amusement, began to look at him differently. They saw something they hadn't recognized before. A willpower that transcended physical limitations, a mental fortitude they had never thought to test within themselves. It was during the following week that Professor Kren, the biologist Jordan had worked with earlier, approached him with an intriguing proposition. The alien professor, though he had studied human anatomy extensively, was still fascinated by the mental aspect of human endurance. He believed that, beyond the physical tests Jordan had already gone through, there was another layer to uncover: the psychological limits of human willpower. "This is a mental endurance trial, Private Hayes," Professor Kren explained one morning, his compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. "We've put species like the Kintar, the Gortek, and the Vril through this before. Now it's time to see how your kind endures." The experiment was simple in theory. Jordan would be placed in a controlled environment that would continuously throw emotional challenges at him. The goal wasn't to test his physical limits. He had already proven he could handle extreme heat, cold, and stress. Now it was time to see how long he could withstand a steady barrage of emotional strain without breaking down. The setup was isolating. Jordan was placed in a room that appeared serene at first, but it quickly became clear that the environment had been engineered to elicit emotional responses. Subtle changes in the air pressure would simulate feelings of loneliness. Ambient noises began to trigger subtle memories of regret, moments of failure from his past. Then, a visual stimulus, a flicker of a loved one's face, triggered the feeling of loss, the grief of missing home. Slowly, the room shifted into a distorted mirror of his past, challenging him to face his deepest fears and insecurities. As the trial began, Jordan clenched his fists, his joints cracking with each subtle shift in position. His knees gave a faint pop as he stood in the middle of the room, trying to focus. For the first few minutes, the sounds and images were mild, nothing he couldn't shrug off. But as the simulation progressed, the emotional weight became heavier. The subtle loneliness turned into a crushing isolation. The sense of failure he had pushed away for years began to resurface. His heart raced as memories of missed opportunities and broken relationships flashed before him. The grief became overwhelming, and his body trembled from the flood of emotions. He could feel it, the mental fatigue starting to set in. His mind wanted to retreat, to shut down, to escape from the flood of emotions. But there was something within him that refused to let go. "Stay focused," he whispered to himself, his voice shaky. "Don't give in." His knees cracked again as he shifted on his feet, the pain in his joints almost forgotten as the emotional storm raged within him. But he endured. He didn't scream, didn't collapse. He simply stood there, breathing deeply, forcing himself to stay in the moment. The room seemed to shift around him, but his focus remained on the one thing he could control: his own resolve. Hours passed, though time seemed to warp in the emotional maze the room had become. The room's conditions pushed him to confront his deepest vulnerabilities. But Jordan didn't falter. He kept breathing. He kept fighting to remain steady. When the simulation ended, Professor Kren's voice echoed through the room, almost gently. "Private Hayes, your performance was remarkable. You did not break. You did not succumb to the emotional pressure." Jordan, his knees now trembling, let out a shaky breath. His body was exhausted, but his mind was clearer than ever. "I guess I'm still here," he said with a tired grin. "Sometimes it's just about hanging on." Professor Kren was silent for a moment, his multifaceted eyes reflecting deep contemplation. "You have something unique, Private Hayes. What you just went through, it's not just about physical endurance. It's the ability to persist mentally, emotionally. It's something that no other species here has demonstrated to this extent." Jordan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words sink in. The human spirit had proven itself again, against the harshest trials, both physical and mental. For all the alien species at Sci-Fi Intergalactic University, the resilience of humanity had become a point of reference, a quiet, unshakable force. As Jordan exited the room, his body cracked with every step, but his heart felt lighter. It wasn't just about surviving the tests anymore. It was about proving something. That even when everything tried to break you, there was always a way to keep going. Word of Jordan's resilience had spread far beyond the confines of Xanthar Intergalactic University. What had begun as isolated experiments, each more astonishing than the last, had blossomed into something much larger, a movement of sorts, among the university's students and faculty. More than ever, they began to see humanity not as a fragile species, but as a symbol of unwavering endurance. One afternoon, Professor Lyragen, who had taken a personal interest in Jordan's progress, approached him with an unexpected proposition. "Private Hayes," she began, her voice firm but tinged with admiration, "you've accomplished something incredible here, and I believe it's time to take that beyond the walls of this university." Jordan looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We've been contacted by the Galactic Council," she explained, lowering her voice. "They've heard about your extraordinary abilities. The Council is organizing a conference on interspecies cooperation, and they want you to speak. Your story has inspired many, not just here, but throughout the galaxy. The Council believes that humanity's resilience can teach us all something. They want you to represent humanity's strength and share your experiences." Jordan's heart skipped a beat. The Galactic Council was a prestigious assembly of some of the most influential beings in the galaxy. Leaders, scientists, diplomats. To be asked to speak there was an honor, one few had ever been offered. "But I'm just a soldier," Jordan said, his voice almost uncertain. "I don't know if I'm the right person for something like that." Professor Zhen's eyes softened. "You've already proven more than you realize. You've demonstrated something that no one here, no one in the galaxy, expected. The ability to endure under pressure, both physical and emotional, is a quality that transcends species. And it's not just your physical ability that they admire, but your resolve." Jordan felt the weight of her words. It had been a long time since he had thought of himself as anything other than someone just trying to make it through another day. But now, with the eyes of the galactic community upon him, he felt the pressure of something much greater. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about representing humanity's legacy of resilience. I guess I can give it a shot," he said, the realization settling in. Professor Zhen smiled, a rare moment of approval lighting her face. "I'll arrange the details. The conference will be held in 2 weeks. Prepare yourself. You're going to be speaking to the most influential minds in the galaxy." As Jordan left the professor's office, the weight of the task ahead began to settle on his shoulders. He had been tested physically, mentally, and emotionally, but this would be different. Speaking before the Galactic Council would be more than just an opportunity. It would be a defining moment for humanity. That night, as he sat alone in his quarters, Jordan reflected on his journey. He had never asked for fame or recognition. But here he was, about to speak for all of humanity. He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the tension in his body. His joints still popped with every movement, but they no longer felt like limitations. His knees creaked, his muscles ached, but each pain was a reminder of everything he had overcome and everything he still had the strength to face. The next morning, Jordan met with his fellow students who were eager to hear about his upcoming speech. Some were excited to see him represent humanity, while others were still skeptical. But what was most evident was that no one doubted his ability to endure whatever came next. For the first time since arriving on Xanthar, Jordan realized that he wasn't just a symbol of human resilience. He was becoming a leader, someone who could inspire others to face their own challenges, to push past their limits, and to never give up. The Galactic Council awaited. Jordan Hayes was ready, and humanity was about to make its mark on the galaxy in ways they had never imagined. The day of the Galactic Council conference arrived, and Jordan found himself standing on the grand stage of the Zifrin Nexus, a colossal structure built to host the most important diplomatic events in the galaxy. The conference hall was filled with representatives from countless species, all of whom had gathered to discuss pressing matters of galactic unity and cooperation. The air buzzed with anticipation, and in the midst of the crowded hall, Jordan stood alone, one human, amidst beings whose strength, intellect, and power far surpassed his own. He glanced at the viewing screens that displayed the logos of various alien species, the towering Vrex with their impenetrable exoskeletons, the delicate Lunarians whose translucent skin shimmered in the low light, and the intense Kintar, who thrived in extreme conditions that would cause any human to collapse. They were all here, waiting to hear what he had to say. As the lights dimmed and the crowd fell silent, the HFY representative, a tall figure with bony limbs and a sharp voice, took the podium and announced Jordan's arrival. "Private Jordan Hayes, from the planet Earth," the voice echoed, sending ripples through the crowd. Jordan stepped forward, his knees creaking under the weight of the moment. His body felt more fragile than ever, and his joints ached from days of tension. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The world was watching. But this wasn't about him. It was about the strength of humanity. He had come a long way from the lonely days of military training and the quiet nights in his quarters at Senthar. This was his chance to represent humanity. He stood before the microphone, feeling the weight of the thousands of eyes on him, but he couldn't focus on that. Instead, his thoughts turned back to the days when he had first arrived at Senthar. The looks of disbelief, the cracks in his knees that had seemed like a barrier to everything. He remembered how every alien species had seen humanity as fragile, weak, and small. But now, here he was, standing as proof that human resilience had something to offer the galaxy. "I'm not going to pretend that humanity is the strongest species in the galaxy," he began, his voice calm but steady. "We don't have regenerative abilities. We don't live for hundreds of years. We can't control the elements or bend reality to our will. But what we do have is resilience. When things get tough, when the universe seems to be against us, we keep going. We don't stop. We face our fears, our failures, and our pain. We learn from it, and we push forward." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Vreel, with their telepathic abilities, exchanged silent thoughts. The Kintar's heavy eyes narrowed in curiosity. But Jordan kept his focus. "Resilience isn't just about surviving the pain," he continued. "It's about growing through it. It's about embracing the hardships, accepting that we won't always win, but knowing that the struggle itself makes us stronger." Jordan paused for a moment, his mind flashing back to the tests he had endured, the pain in his body, the emotional turmoil of the past weeks. Yet, despite it all, he had never broken. "We are not invincible," he said softly, "but we are strong. We may fall, we may falter, but we always rise again. That's what makes us human." For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, slowly, the first ripple of applause began. It was quiet at first, uncertain, but it grew, louder and louder, until the entire room was filled with the sound of appreciation. Some of the alien representatives stood, acknowledging the human standing at the podium, his knees creaking as he held his ground. In that moment, Jordan realized that he had not just spoken for humanity. He had shown the galaxy something greater, the indomitable spirit of a species that had never known the luxury of immortality or superhuman strength, yet had survived and thrived through sheer will. When the applause finally died down, Professor Elixa, who had been in the audience, approached him with a proud smile. "Private Hayes, you've done it. You've shown the galaxy what humanity is truly made of." Jordan gave a tired, but genuine smile in return. His knees ached, his body was exhausted, but for the first time since arriving at Senthar, he felt that he had found his place in the galaxy, not as a curiosity or a weakling, but as a symbol of human endurance and strength. As he stepped off the stage, he knew that humanity's story was just beginning. The universe had seen their resilience, and the legacy of humanity's spirit would echo through the stars for centuries to come.